Is the president looking to further outsource war? My next guest writes Blackwater is a reminder of just how privatized the Iraq war has become. Jeremy Scahill is a Puffin Foundation writing fellow at the Nation Institute. He's author of the forthcoming book, Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. He has an op-ed piece in yesterday's Los Angeles Times entitled Are Mercenaries in Iraq? Joining us now in the Firehouse studio. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Jeremy.
It's good to be home.
We invited Blackwater on. They refused. But, Jeremy, let's talk first about Blackwater. What is it?
Blackwater is a company that began in 1996 as a private military training facility, and it was built near the Great Dismal Swamp of North Carolina. And visionary executives, all of them former Navy SEALs or other elite special forces people, envisioned it as a project that would take advantage of the anticipated government outsourcing. Well, here we are a decade later, and it's the most powerful mercenary firm in the world. It has 20,000 soldiers on the ready, the world's largest private military base, a fleet of 20 aircraft, including helicopter gunships. It's become nothing short of the Praetorian Guard for the Bush administration's so-called global war on terror, and it's headed by a very right-wing Christian activist, ex-Navy SEAL named Erik Prince, whose family was one of the major bankrollers of the Republican Revolution of the 1990s. He himself is a significant funder of President Bush and his allies, and what they've done is they've built a very frightening empire near the Great Dismal Swamp in North Carolina. They've got about 2,300 men actively deployed around the world. They provide the security for the U.S. Diplomats in Iraq. They've guarded everyone from Paul Bremer and John Negroponte to the current U.S. Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad. They're training troops in Afghanistan. They've been active in the Caspian Sea, where they set up a special forces base miles from the Iranian border. They really are the front line in what the Bush administration viewed as a necessary revolution in military affairs. In fact, they represent the life's work of Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld.
What do you mean the life's work?
Well, Dick Cheney, when he was defense secretary under George H.W. Bush during the Gulf War, one of the last things he did before leaving office was to create an unprecedented, lucrative market for the firm that he would go on to head, Halliburton. He commissioned Halliburton to do a study on how to privatize the military bureaucracy. That effectively created the groundwork for the absolute war profiteer bonanza that we've seen unfold in the aftermath of 9/11. I mean, Clinton was totally on board with all of this, but it has exploded since 9/11. And so Cheney, after he left office, when the first Bush was the president, went on to work at the neoconservative American Enterprise Institute, which really led the push for privatization of the government, not just the military. And then when these guys took office, Rumsfeld's first real major address, delivered on September 10th, 2001, he literally declared war on the Pentagon bureaucracy and said he had come to liberate the Pentagon. And what he meant by that, and he wrote this in an article in Foreign Affairs, was that governments, unlike companies, can't die. And he literally said that. So you have to figure out new incentives for competition. And Rumsfeld said that it should be run more like a corporation than a bureaucracy. And so the company that most embodies that vision, and they call it a revolution in military affairs, it's a total part of the Project for a New American Century and the neoconservative movement. The company that most embodies that is not Halliburton, it's Blackwater.
Explain what you understand happened on Tuesday, President Bush giving his address, the Blackwater helicopter crashing.
Well, I think a lot of people, even though I think there's been a lot of reporting on it and it has been out in the public sphere, I think a lot of people still would be surprised to know that the U.S. ambassador in Iraq and the U.S. diplomats throughout Iraq and U.S. diplomatic facilities and regional occupation offices are actually guarded by mercenaries. And Blackwater has a $300 million contract to provide diplomatic security, and so they guard Zalmay Khalilzad and other U.S. diplomats in Iraq. Well, what we understand, and of course, as you know, reports are always very shaky in the early stages, is that a U.S. diplomatic convoy came under fire in a Sunni neighborhood of Baghdad, and a Blackwater helicopter apparently landed to try to respond to that attack, because Blackwater and its Little Bird helicopters provide the security for diplomatic convoys, and they got engaged in some kind of a firefight on the ground, and 4 men from one helicopter were killed. Then another helicopter responded and was brought down either by fire or it got tangled in some wires. 4 of the 5 men who worked for Blackwater that were killed were shot in the back of the head, according to reports. And what's interesting about this is that Zalmay Khalilzad said that he had traveled with the men, and then said that he had gone to the morgue to view their bodies. And he said that the circumstances of their death were unclear because of what he called the fog of war. But I think it's very possible that they were guarding a very senior diplomat, if not Zalmay Khalilzad himself. I mean, we don't have evidence to suggest that, but the fact that Khalilzad really came out forward and said these were fine men, I was with them, and visited them in the morgue, indicates that it could have been a very serious attack on a senior official.
What do you think is the actual body count in Iraq of U.S. soldiers? I mean, we count them very carefully. You know, when it surpassed 3,000, this was extremely significant. What really is the number of U.S. Military dead?
Military dead is, I think it's interesting because the lines have totally been erased. I would say that we should be counting the deaths of Blackwater soldiers in the total troop count. I've filed over the last year a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests, and one of the ways that we have found to discover the deaths of the number of contractors that have been killed is actually through the Department of Labor, because the government has a federal insurance scheme that's been set up, which is actually very controversial. It's grew out of something called the Defense Base Act, and it's insurance provided to contractors who service the U.S. military abroad. And so as of late last year, more than 600 families of contractors in Iraq had filed for those benefits. So I think we're talking somewhere in the realm of, and these are just U.S. contractors that have rights to federal benefits inside of the United States. Remember, it's not necessarily Americans that make up the majority of these 100,000 contractors that are operating in Iraq right now, 48,000 of whom are mercenaries, according to the GAO. So I don't think it's possible to put a fine point on the number of troops killed, because the Bush administration has found a backdoor way to engage in an undeclared expansion of the occupation by deploying these private armies. And at the State of the Union address the other night, Bush announces this Civilian Reserve Corps, which is gaining momentum among